Hey guys, welcome back to PHP Fundamentals. In the previous lesson, we dug into arrays, but I only showed you more or less the syntax. How would you create an array? What are the different types of arrays? And how would you create an array in PHP 5.4? So in this lesson, I'm going to take it a little bit further and we're going to discuss how you can manipulate arrays. How could you, for example, add an item to the beginning of an array or the end? Or how would you remove an item? And then finally, we're going to top off the lesson by taking a look at just a couple of PHP's array functions, helper functions that allow you to filter over an array and perform some type of task. Okay, let's get into it. But this time, we're going to take a slightly different approach. So far, we've opened an editor, and then we've added the code and viewed it in the browser to see the output. But sometimes when you simply want to see, for example, how a function is declared or what the result would be from that function, you really don't want to view it in the browser. You just need to open up the command line and try it out. But what PHP provides by default isn't the greatest thing, to be honest. If I open up terminal and we go to PHP-H, this will bring up all of the various things that we can do. And PHP does have this interactive shell, -a. So if I type PHP-A, so for example, you would think we could do things like 2 plus 2, and then that would display 4. But nope, that's not going to work. I should probably add the semicolon. Nope, that still doesn't work. Well, what if we try to echo hi there? Okay, that works, but there's no syntax highlighting. It's all displayed on its own line. We could try things like echo string and string. And what this will allow me to do is determine whether a specific string, uppercase or lowercase, occurs within a larger string. So we'll say our haystack or our main string will be hi there, everyone. And we're going to look to see if it contains the word there. All right, nope, that's not going to work. Let's hit the semicolon. And now you'll see what is returned is whether something was matched. So in this case, it did find that string, so it returns from that point on. But as you can imagine, it's just not very intuitive. Instead, we're going to use a tool that Facebook built called PHP Shell. So I'm going to close this out, and if we go to phpsh.org, you can see that the Facebook developers actually created it for themselves, but it can be a huge help for us. So you'll see that it's available at their GitHub page, so we can open that up. And if you are a Git user and you know how to use it, you can definitely just clone that in. For now, because I don't expect you to know Git, we're going to download this zip file. Now do note they actually built it in Python, which is somewhat ironic, but Mac will have Python installed on the system by default, but that will not be the case for Windows. So if you are a Windows user, you will want to go to python.org, and if we go to download, you can simply find one that works for you. And it looks like this Python Windows installer, which is a binary, which means you can double click, and that will get you all set up without having to do all of the compiling yourself. All right, so go ahead and get that set up if you are a Windows user. Again, if you're on Mac, then you don't need to worry about anything. So at this point, we have this new Facebook file. So I can double click to unzip it. And now we need to figure out, well, how do we actually install this? Well, it's pretty easy. Just come back to the GitHub page and we will come down to installing globally, which is what we want. And we can see there's just 3 commands that we have to run. So let's just bring that up. I will exit out of the PHP interactive shell and switch into my desktop. And if I list the files, we want to open up that Facebook directory. Okay, I will paste in that first command, python setup, and this will just take a few seconds or so. Next, we will paste in the second one where we actually install it. That's done, and that's it really. Now we can run the php sh command. And if I type that, now we're in the PHP shell. So at this point, you can run h, and this will give you your help file, everything that you can do. The 2 core ones that you're going to be using is D, and what that will do is give you documentation. So for example, if I run D and then that function we used earlier, stristr, now we can get all of the information on it. So if you want to use a function but you don't exactly know how to use it, rather than opening up php.net and browsing to the function, you can just open up the shell right here. And so what we can see here is, here's the function, here are the parameters it accepts. So it accepts the string, which is your haystack, and then the next parameter will be the needle. And that's simply slang for what you're searching for. So what is the thing we're searching for, and what is the haystack or the set that we're looking in? And then it gives you some more information here. So that's certainly helpful. And the other thing that you will want to run is exclamation point. And this is how you can execute shell commands. So when you're within PHP, it's going to assume that everything you type is a PHP command. But if you actually want to execute it as a shell command, you can prepend an exclamation point, like so. Okay, so now we can actually toy with these functions directly from the command line without having to create new scripts. I will clear to the desktop and get rid of that folder, and now I'll give you an example. We're going to create an array again, and we're going to call it months. And now we're going to make it equal to an array, and we'll use shorthand here, Jan, Feb, March, April, May. All right, so now we've created this array. How do we display it? Well, if it was something we could echo, for example, the very first item, we can use either echo or PHP shell provides shorthand, which you can't use in your web projects, but when you're in the shell, you can use it. And that is the equal sign. So now we're going to equal months and then get the very first item in the array. And now we get January. If we want to analyze the array, once again, we can use print r months. So you can see this is an easy interactive way to toy around with some things. Maybe you're experimenting, you're trying to figure out how something works. Well, do it directly in the command line. That's easier. Now we're ready to get started with some of the new commands that you didn't learn in the previous lesson. So for example, we've learned how to create this array, but how do I add on to that array? So I have May here, but I want to add June to that array after it has been completed. Well, there's two different ways. We can use array push, or we can use a shorthand. We'll begin with the array push function. So I will type array push, and array push is going to accept two parameters. And by parameters, what I'm referring to is values or variables that you will pass into the function so that it can work with them. So if you can imagine for a function, and a function is just a bit of code that can be abstracted away for reuse. Think of it like that. So this function, it needs to know some information. It needs to know, well, what array am I working with? What array am I going to add a value onto? And then it also needs to know, what value am I going to add to this array? And we need to provide that. And the order matters. So sometimes you'll have to refer to the documentation to figure out the correct order. In this case, for array push, it wants to know, well, what is the array I'm working with? Well, we called the array months. Next, we're going to separate these parameters with a comma, and the second one will be, okay, what value am I adding? We're adding June. So I will add it like so, and now that is run. We haven't displayed anything, but now if I print r months, you'll see that, yep, we have added June on. Now there's actually a shorthand way to do this as well. Rather than using the array underscore push function, we can simply do this, months, and then I will open up brackets, and this is the same thing as saying push. So now we have July. We'll add it like that, and we're getting the exact same effect. But in one case, we used array push, and in the other case, we type the variable name, we open brackets, we don't add anything there, though we could if we needed to, and then we add our value. And this is the most common way that you'll see people push values to an array. But what if I want to remove an item from an array? I don't want July. How can I actually get that item off of the array? Well, we use a different function, array pop. And just think of that as popping a balloon. You're going to pop that last one off of the array. So I'm going to run array pop, and this time it doesn't need two values, because if you think about it, array pop specifically means remove the last item from the array. So it doesn't need to know anything else than what array do I remove the last item from. So we will pass months, and if I run that and we print our months again, now you'll see, yep, we have removed that July value. Now here's a cool thing about these functions though. Not only will they execute what we would expect, but they will return the thing that they manipulated. So for example, if I run array pop again, and I'm going to press up to filter through my previous commands, now I'm going to go and assign that to a variable. So we'll say, in our case, we'll call it month, and we're going to array pop months. So this time, it's going to pop that last item, which would be June, and it's going to take that June value and store it within the variable month. We'll save that, and now I'm going to echo month, and now you can see June. So this can be really helpful when you want to take something off an array, but you still want to have access to that value, maybe to manipulate it at some point. And this is going to be true for all of the array pop, array push, all of those functions. All right, let's print our months again, see where we are at this point. Now we know how to add an item using array push. We know how to remove the last item with array pop. But what if you actually want to remove an item from the beginning? I don't want to remove the last item. I want to remove the first item. Well, in that case, we use a function called shift, array shift. And I must admit, the naming of this is a little confusing. Array shift, and then you'll also find out that we have array unshift. And they're not as expressive as we might hope, but you will get to the point where you simply memorize it. And that's just the way it is. So in our case, array shift will remove the first item from the array that you provided. So once again, we'll provide it months. And if I print R months again, now you'll see, yep, it has removed that item. Good. But what if I want to add an item to the array? But not to the end of the array, I want to add an item to the beginning of the array. Or in our case, I simply want to add January to the beginning. Well, you use the opposite of shift. You use array unshift. We begin by providing it the array that we're working with, and the second will be, what is the value that you're adding to the beginning of the array? So now, one more time, print R, and we have added that back on. All right, so try to play around with these, commit them to memory. You have array push, array pop, for adding and removing from the end of the array, and you have array shift and array unshift for removing and adding an item to the beginning of the array. Now, if we switch over to PHP.net and I search for array, what you're going to find is there are dozens and dozens of different array functions that we can use in our projects depending upon our needs. If I scroll down, I will click on array functions, and now you can see all of these different ones. And I don't want you to worry and feel like you have to memorize all of them, because you don't. When you need to perform a specific action with an array, you can always come back and search for it. Maybe you need to replace something within an array. Well, then you can hunt down array place. Mostly, I want you to learn the basic ones: array pop, array push, and also array slice. So take a look at this one. What this will do is it allows us to extract a slice of the array. And what's great about PHP.net is it gives you lots of examples. So we'll scroll down here and they'll show you, okay, imagine you have an array with 5 items in it. If you run array slice, you provide the array as the first parameter, and the second parameter is going to be a number, or an integer as we call it. What that's going to do is it's going to return the rest of the array beginning at that point. So you see here, when we pass 2, it slices off from that point and on. Now you might be wondering, well, why doesn't it start at B? B is number 2. No, remember, arrays are 0 based. So we're doing 0, 1, 2. So we're starting there, and then we're slicing off from that point. If we test this out in the terminal, let's print R months, see what we have at this point. Okay, and now let's say we want to take from April and on. Well, we would do array slice, months, and where do we want to start? We want to start at April. So you would do 0, 1, 2, 3, and they provided that value for us. If you have trouble with the idea that they're 0 based and you keep having to manually count, just subtract 1. It's the easiest possible way. So in our case, let's say we want to start at March, but we don't have this helper right here. You would just say, okay, that's the third item. 3 minus 1 is 2, so we're going to get the second index. And we'll start with that. So we'll hit 2. Now what I want you to note though is we're not being destructive here. So if I run that, we're not going to get anything. If we run print R months again, we still have that original array. We're not being destructive here. We're performing a function that returns a new array, but we didn't store that result anywhere, so it just disappeared. So this time we're going to say output equals array slice months 2. Now if I print R output, we have this new modified array that contains only those items, but we still have months, and that's still intact as we would hope. Now there is an optional third parameter that we can pass to array slice. You'll see it right here. And if that parameter is provided, that will specify how many to take from that point. So once again, print R months. So let's say we want to slice out February and March. If you're working along, pause this video and see if you can figure out how can you create a variable that stores an array which contains February and March. Okay, well, I will create a new variable and we'll call it output again. And now I'm going to run array slice. We're going to begin by providing the array as months. Next, where are we starting? We're starting right here with February, and that is the first index. So we'll add that right there. And now I want to tell it to take 2 because we want February and March. So I'm going to specify start here with February and take a total of 2. So I'll add 2 on right there. And now if I print our output, we have this new array that contains February and March. And again though, months is still intact. We haven't ruined or been destructive with that original array. But now that does beg the question, what if you do want to filter this array? Well, you can use array filter. So if you were learning this on your own, you would think, okay, well, how do I pass the arguments to array filter? Well, you might begin, and I'm going to close out Chrome. You might begin by typing D for documentation, array filter. And now we can see the arguments that we pass are the input, or the array to iterate over, and a callback function. So let's try this out. We still have months. Now we're going to run array filter over months, and now we're going to pass a callback function. If we're using PHP 5.3, we can use what's known as a lambda, or you can think of that as an anonymous function, or a function that really is only meant to be used once. So we will pass a function here, and I'm going to go over functions in more detail shortly, so just come along for the ride right now. And what array filter will do is it will accept the item, and this function will either return true or false. And the way that works is if it returns true, then that item will remain within the array. But if it returns false, it's going to be removed from the array. So in this case, let's figure out something to filter. Maybe for some reason we want to filter this array down to only items where there are 3 digits in the month. Okay, well, we can return either true or false, but of course that needs to be dynamic. We need to write a test that determines whether that will be true or false. And our test is going to be, is the length of the string 3 characters? And PHP provides a function called strlen, string length. It's going to accept a value, in this case, item. Remember, in this case, we're filtering through the array, and for each one, this item will be referenced by the item variable. But you can call that anything you want. You could call it item or month or anything. It's just a variable that you've created. So now our test is going to be check the string length, and we're going to test to see if it equals 3. Again, we're going to go over all of this syntax in future lessons. Just kind of go along for the ride right now. So now we're all set. We've run our filter. We're passing in the array. We're passing in our test. Think of array filter as a test. And this test is going to only return true if the length of the month is exactly 3 characters. But now remember, we're doing this filtering, but again, it's going to return this modified array, but we haven't done anything. So what we'll do instead is assign the result to a variable, and we will call it 3, which isn't the best variable name, but we're working with pseudocode, so that should be fine for now. All right, so let's print R3 to see how it works. And as we would hope, very cool. We've now used the array filter function to specify that we want to create this new array, but it can only contain items that are exactly 3 characters long. And that's using the array filter function. So if this seemed a little advanced, a little confusing, don't worry. We're going to have an entire lesson dedicated to functions. What are they? Why are they helpful? And when would you use them? So finishing up for today, if you want to add an item to an array, you can either use array, this syntax, or you can use array push, and then the array and the value. If you want to remove an item from the end of the array, you use array pop. If you want to add an item to the beginning of the array, you would use array unshift. And if you want to remove that item from the beginning of the array, you use array shift. And last but not least, we reviewed how to use array slice as well as array filter. And we've only taken a look at around 10% of all of the functions you would use, but these will get you a long way. If you would like, I encourage you to also investigate array map as well as array walk, but we will be covering those in future lessons as well. All right, my name is Jeffrey Way. This is PHP Fundamentals. Stay tuned for the next lesson.